Hey everyone, how's it going? We're going to review our resistance training guidelines, so strength training, and looking at how we go about prescribing that, and or setting up the basics of a session plan. So here are our fit principles, kind of outlined a little bit differently. Again, we'll go through each of these in a bit more detail, but type of exercise. When we're talking about strength training, we're really talking about you know, different types of resistance. So we can have everything from free weights to barbells and dumbbells, resistance machines, so weight machines, or our own body weight, which is a bit more along the lines of calisthenics. Um, Very popular now is like mini bands or bands or super bands. They're all kind of similar where they have different strengths of tensile strength of rubber and provide some resistance based off of that. As far as our volume or the amount of exercises we're doing within a session, this kind of I wouldn't necessarily is related to intensity of exercise, but it's more along the lines of our duration of resistance training. So we have a certain number of exercises that we need to get to. We do a certain number of sets for each of those, and within each one of those sets is what we'd call the number of repetitions. So an example of this would be I go to the gym with my plan. I have 6 exercises that I need to do. Okay. So I have, let's say, 3 sets of each of these exercises, which means in each one of those sets, I will do 10 to 12 repetitions. So if it's a squat, that's my exercise I'm doing, I'll end up completing my first set of 10 to 12 repetitions of squats. So I do 10 to 12 squats, let's say body weight squats, I'm done. So that would be set 1, okay? Once I'm done that set, I'm typically prescribed a rest period. Now, depending on what my goals are, whether we'll get to a chart later, but the more weight that I'm trying to lift, uh, and typically, so the heavier the weight's going to be, the longer rest period that I need. Usually, if it's lighter weight and even higher repetitions, I don't need that long of a rest. Now, the average amount of break time for someone just doing some generalized, let's say 8 to 12 repetition strength training, what you're really looking for there is about a 90-second rest, roughly as like a minimum, before you start your next set of 10 to 12 repetitions. So hopefully that makes sense as far as how you describe or prescribe volume of exercises, including the rest period there. And then you get longer rests in between each exercise too if you need. Typically, I find with these 90-second breaks, sometimes they get drawn out. And again, if you're going for a bit more strength, that's fine. If you're leaning towards what's called metabolic conditioning, that would be more a circuit-based exercise program. So you might have what's called like a superset, where you'll have 3 exercises all put together, and you are supposed to do one after the other with very little rest, if any at all. So you might do push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. All body weight, and you just need to do them one after another. You're doing 20 repetitions of each because there's not much external weight, so you're just trying to do 20. And once you're done that set or a superset of 3 exercises grouped together, then you'll have your 2-minute break, your 5-minute break, whatever it is, before you go and do another round. And again, the idea with a metabolic conditioning setup or format is you're using a lot of weight and resistance, but trying to do it at a pace or tempo with minimal breaks, a little more continuous to be able to increase your heart rate. So the idea is you will typically get some sort of aerobic activity out of it, or aerobic stimuli, as well as the strength benefits of resistance training. And so the term metabolic conditioning isn't wrong. It definitely does increase your metabolism, as all physical activity does, but it's again, meant to try to frame that format of exercise as far as body composition management, because you get, again, strength benefits as well as aerobic. Okay. Frequency of training we'll speak to a little bit later, and intensity as well. How do we go about prescribing that? So first we'll dive back into type of exercises. I already mentioned some as far as the equipment you can use, but we can also think about our exercise selection when we're talking about weightlifting. That becomes very important, because if we're not careful when designing a program, we can get very repetitious of trying to train the same muscle group over and over and over at a certain intensity, which can be very fatiguing, which may or may not be good as far as working out. Many people that start out, for example, maybe pop onto YouTube and get a leg or lower body kind of specific workout, and while the person that's designing the program is probably very well-intentioned, and very fit themselves, they tend to overload newer fitness goers with a hyper focus on, let's say, quadriceps. So a lot of people will, if they're picking a lower body workout, like a 20-minute blaster or something that you find on the web, unfortunately, one of the best ways to keep the heart rate up and continually make people feel like they're having a really good workout is to redundantly hit the lower body. And for a lot of people, that means, if they're just doing a body weight workout at home, means repetitively hitting their quadriceps. The next day they say their knees are really sore, and a lot of the time that is not to do with the knee joint itself. It's just the muscles that attach to the knee. So I digress. So picking what muscles you work on and in what way and what types of exercise you're doing that day is important. The form of resistance is less important, but again, managing what exercises is. So we'll get to that in just a moment here. So our multi-muscle group exercises, or what's also referred to as compound exercises, use more than one joint. So a squat uses your ankle, knee, and hip joint. A bench press uses your shoulders and elbows. Okay, so again, anytime you get more than one muscle group working to complete an exercise, that is a compound or multi-muscle group exercise. What's fantastic about those is these are great to put into, again, a metabolic conditioning type program or a very efficient strength training program. So when we are doing multi-muscle group exercises, because we're using more than one muscle group, we get the benefit and, again, efficiency of working many groups at the same time, rather than having to spend this very segregated time frame of working out each muscle group individually and isolating them. That I feel is very specific and tailored to people that are wanting to get more into, say, bodybuilding or fitness modeling. But if that is not you, if it was general health and fitness, those multi-muscle groups or compound movements are the way to go, in my opinion. And body composition management. So if you're trying to, again, decrease body fat, increase muscle mass, compound lifts are the best bang for your buck. You can also do single muscle group exercises, so focusing. Rehabilitation actually is also a good place to try to isolate specific muscle groups when you're trying to get back from an injury initially. So for example, a bicep curl or a calf raise would be a single muscle group working over a single joint. And they say they're assistance exercises. I personally haven't ever heard that also called for this. Usually it's isolated, where you're just focusing on one muscle group. And ultimately, when you're designing plans and picking these sort of exercises of what to put together in a strength training program, you usually want to avoid, if you can, just purely doing agonist or one side of your body, so to speak. You want to be able to get both. So what do I mean by that? Well, typically, let's just say we're going for a general program to work the majority of our muscles in a single exercise session. What I typically suggest is following something along this format, where you have a lower body squat front loaded with some weight in front to work your anterior chain. So the glutes will still get work, but quadriceps as well in this case. You get some back work by trying to maintain that solid midline throughout the squat. But again, this is a little bit more quad dominant than not. And then you can also include a hinge. I wish I had a better graphic, but this is a deadlift. So this person, as you would see, their hips would actually be higher up, their body would be a bit more flat, and they'd be hinging through the hips. And so that would load up the hamstrings, just to show you on the side profile, hamstrings more and glutes versus the squat. So again, that's the hinge that would work the glutes and the hamstrings. The squat up here would work more the quads and again, some glutes. Okay, so again, these are two lower body exercises that you could potentially alternate through, doing one a day, but again, they work different sides of the upper thigh, so you could do both in a day. But then the other important part is when you get to the upper body, you can do a push or pull, I should say a push and a pull. And so in this day, just to rephrase and frame it a little differently, you're going to do a push movement, a pull movement, and a hinge and or squat. So the idea is if I push with my upper body, I get, say, my chest and my triceps worked. If I was to pull on it on that same plane, so I'm pushing up against gravity, I'm pulling back against cables or gravity, then I will work my biceps and back. And so again, if we just think of my arm for a second, I've worked out my triceps through the push, my biceps through the pull, as well as all my back during a pull and all my anterior side or my chest during a push. So again, one push, one pull, a hinge or a squat. It could be like your first 3 exercises, and then your next 3 exercises could be a vertical push and pull, so a lat pull down and a shoulder press. And then again, picking a squat or a hinge. And then you have 6 exercises. That's kind of a complete day for you. Okay. But the other thing to consider while we're looking at that is how our muscles recover. So again, we don't want to overdo any one particular muscle group. We want to give it time for recover. And why is recovery so important for strength training? Well, any training, or this is aerobic as well, but I think this conversation lends itself well to strength training. So we get some sort of stimuli, as I've mentioned before in previous lectures. So we break down our body, we break down the muscle, we fatigue ourselves out, we challenge ourselves, and we actually weaken ourselves through our strength training. We get home, we get our protein, average of 26 grams of protein or whatever in us. We rest, we sleep, we get some more carbs in us, and our muscles are starting to be able to repair. Okay, so a day goes by, and maybe you feel a bit, hopefully, of low, not anything too extraneous, low-grade DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness. So you don't really feel like working out anyways. The muscles are a little achy and sore. Hopefully low grade. 2 days go by, and all of a sudden you start getting into this area of super compensation. So your body has not only recovered and healed to the point of where it was originally, but it realized you are going to challenge it and try to break it down by this much. So it's trying to make itself stronger. So you have this moment after you've fully recovered, and it depends on the muscle group, which we'll get to in a moment, of super compensation. When we have that, we are stronger than when we actually started, but only because we recovered. If we got back in the gym and worked out again, we'd see this curve downward drop again, and we would not reach this time of super compensation. And so when you string that all together over time, we get something like this, where we strain our body, we super compensate, we recover, and then we work out again, super compensate, etc., on and on, until we are reaching our health and fitness goals up here. Hurrah. Okay. But when we get to choosing specific exercises for muscle groups, one thing to keep in mind is that different muscle groups recover at different rates. The easiest way to look at this is not specific muscle groups, but to generally look at The lower body recovers much quicker. So this is hamstrings, these are quadriceps. Then our upper body, which is our elbow extensor or tricep, and our elbow flexors are biceps. So in this particular study, we looked at how long after an initial maximum fatigued workload, 5 sets of 6 maximal isokinetic eccentric contractions. And sure enough, what we ended up finding was it took much longer. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 days, and our upper body is still not fully recovered. As we notice, only 90%. Whereas if we look at our lower body, here we are after, let's see, 0 days. 1 day passes and we already get super compensation from our quadriceps. And our hamstrings are coming along, but sure enough, by day 4, day 5, they are recovered. Okay, so if you're planning a workout regime for yourself, the slang or common saying, every day is leg day, as I like to say, has some truth behind it, in the sense that your lower body can recover a lot quicker. But alas, that's your quadriceps. Your hamstrings take up to 4 days. So if you're planning frequency for yourself and you're not maximizing your recovery, and again, this was a sedentary population, so if you are more adept, an intermediate or advanced athlete or resistance trainer, potentially these recovery days are going to go down. But if you want to split up your week, sure enough, you can include quadriceps probably every other day, or and that would probably be okay. With your hamstrings, every 4 days. So now you have quads one day, quads and hamstrings another, and then your upper body flexor extensors, they need more time to recover to get right back up to 100%. So again, to get full strength there, you are looking at almost a weekly turnaround for those muscle groups. Okay, so hopefully that helped illustrate how you might want to pick type of exercise. Okay, but of course our volume is important, as is our intensity, etc., and rest recovery period. So if we're looking at volume, when you're starting out, as kind of alluded to already, start slow and low, pick a set. Eventually work your way up to 2 to 4 sets. Commonly people do 3 sets of exercises, which is sufficient for a lot of people's goals. Your basic guideline is 8 to 12 repetitions. Excuse me. 8 to 12 repetitions. That's good for general strength building and general hypertrophy, so putting on a little bit of muscle, which again, I haven't mentioned this yet, I don't think, in any of our lectures. So it's actually quite challenging to put on muscle. So I know occasionally women, less so nowadays, but in the past have had a concern about looking quote unquote muscly. They didn't want a muscly look, but ultimately what they are hoping to look like definitely involves some sort of toning. And when you're saying that, ultimately you're talking about putting on some muscle and to help with fat loss. This goes the same for males as well, but generally speaking, at this rep range, again, you're not going to get, let's say, a very bulky quickly by any means, but you will start to build strength and you will put on some muscle. So, which is the goal. That is the point, especially for hypertrophy and strength. Okay. Yeah, and so when we're talking about the amount of work that you're doing for intensity for 1 repetition maximums, is usually what you say, you'll see a 1 RM. And when we're talking about 1 RMs at 60 to 80%, it's kind of tough to know if you're just starting out. So how do you gauge what 60 to 80% of one max rep is? Well, you can kind of set yourself up for something like this, where you don't actually just do 1 rep and see what the most amount of weight is that you can lift. You can come to one of these online calculators. Here we are at bodybuilding.com. Yeah. So what we can do is we can actually go and do 10 reps of something. So if you're just starting out, it might be a little easier, feel a little safer to pick a weight and see how heavy you can go for 10 repetitions. And let's say you squatted for 10 reps and that was it. That was the most you could kind of push for that. You can just use this calculator online, and sure enough, you get an idea of a percentage of what you should or could be lifting for 60%, which would be about 80 pounds in this case. So were those numbers always, are they always going to be 100%? No. In a perfect ideal world, under some good supervision, especially if you're just starting out, you would try for a 1 RM. That's going to give you a truer percentage to work from. But if you're just starting out, a ballpark figure around a lower range is good. Okay, so again, starting out with 1, but working up to 3 sets over the span of a month to 6 weeks at the very least, slowly increasing a set maybe each week as your body can respond. If you're still feeling a lot of DOMS, a lot of discomfort after each of your sessions, I would suggest not adding on a set and doing about 8 to 12 repetitions for all 3 sets. If you notice you get to set 3 and you're not able to do 8 repetitions at your chosen weight, you've gone too heavy, give it 1 more week, choose that weight again, wait until you can do about 12 repetitions for the 3 sets, and then increase your weight a little bit, and you should find that that's a good, reasonable, safe, and comfortable way of moving up and increasing that volume that you're moving. Okay. Ultimately, we kind of have different goals here for our rep ranges when we're talking about this volume. Ultimately, if you have higher repetitions, you're going to have lower weights. So, for example, if your upper end repetition for local muscular endurance, what that means is whatever muscle groups you're working out, you're going for muscular endurance, 20 repetitions of whatever lighter weight you can handle for that number of reps is good. I would highly suggest, if you're strength training, do not go over 20 repetitions, especially if you're doing 3 sets. That is more than sufficient. If you're finding that's too easy, you need to increase the resistance. Inversely, on the lower end, if you're going more towards 1 to 5 repetitions, so heavier weights, that is for power and strength. I would not suggest this for a novice. You can, it's been researched where even mostly beginners can try 1 rep maximums for a lot of lifts. This is under supervision with guidance and following a very strict protocol as outlined in 1 RM programs. But I digress. As I suggest, sticking to about 10 reps, much safer, and you can still use online calculators to figure out roughly what those percentages are off of 10, 12 reps, whatever that might be. Okay, definitely the more prudent way to go. How do we figure out our rest periods? Well, as I mentioned before, about 1.5 minutes is on the shorter end. That's more for muscular endurance or hypertrophy. So again, if you're doing 20 repetitions at a lighter weight, you can probably only have about 1 minute break. If you're doing about 12 repetitions and you're hoping to get some hypertrophy or some size, build up a bit of strength that way, 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes is sufficient. Usually, if you set your timer for 90 seconds, then you, once the timer goes off, you slowly make your way over to the weights, you pick them up, you get set up, prep yourself, do the lift. That's about 30 seconds, so you hit about 2 minutes. If you're doing strength and powerlifting, again, this wouldn't be necessarily a novice, but or if you're doing compound lifts like squats, heavy squatting, you definitely want to give yourself 2 to 3, I would say up to about 5 minutes if you're going to be doing anything less than or around 5 repetitions of let's say about like a 90% RM, 1 RM sort of weight. Okay, and the idea behind all of this resting is, well, of course, we want to replenish our ATP PC system. Absolutely. Because again, if you think when we're needing that maximal type 2 muscle fiber recruitment, we need that maximal amount of intracellular free floating ATP and PC ready to give us more energy for our heavy lifting. Okay. It gives us a little time to recover as well. So it limits how much fatigue we're actually feeling in the long run of a full workout. Again, 2 to 4 sets with 8 to 12 repetitions on average. It gives us a little recovery time that way. It decreases that acidity, so we have less muscle soreness during the exercise, but also increased strength to lift again, because again, our target is for each of the reps, or each of the sets, to hit our rep target. Okay. So how often should you go? Well, I already alluded to this a little bit. It depends how you have your split. So your split is your programming over top of your week, and how you split up your muscle groups and how you're going to train them. So what does that mean? Well, again, if you're working out legs fairly often, you can probably do that up to 3 times a week. It says each muscle group trained. That's not necessarily helpful for smaller muscle groups or if you're just starting out. But the magic number for progress in general is 3 times a week, right? That's kind of the go-to golden standard number of frequency to improve any sort of exercise or skill, motor skills, speaking a language, anything you're trying to improve on, minimum 3 times a week, all right? Class twice a week, study at least once on your own, right after. Okay, getting sidetracked there, but so some of these, this is where the benefit of compound lifting comes from. So again, if you're not just isolating your upper body, but it gets distributed through compound lifts, doing 3 times a week becomes a little bit more reasonable for sure. Okay. And again, if you're just doing general health and fitness, a total body resistance training program with that push-pull, squat, or hinge is a good approach. But you can also set up some fairly complex split routines as well. And you can get up to 5 days, I think, in the gym if you really wanted to. Okay, for intensity, again, we already spoke about this a little bit with our 1RMs and figuring out a percentage of that. But the closer to a 1RM you get, the closer to 100% of your maximum lifting that you get. And the lower the percentage as far as how much of your 1RM you're doing, the more reps you should be doing for each set, and vice versa. So the goal typically when we're setting these targets, though, especially for something like a 8 to 12 repetition workout, is not that we want to go 110% fatigue every single set. In fact, there's some research that shows stopping with feeling like you have about 1 more, maybe 2 more repetitions in you for any given set is probably okay. It helps you save some strength to be able to push the full reps up to your 3rd set or 4th set, whatever you happen to be doing. And so not going to total failure, as they call it, so still being able to control the weights and safely put them down, is shown to be just as advantageous as going to failure on each of your sets. So something to keep in mind when you see people dropping and throwing weights around the gym. This table is really, really good. I highly suggest that you go to it in detail. I wonder if I can just blow this up a bit for you. It's not letting me zoom in. But the gist of it is it gives you some targets here as far as endurance, strength, hypertrophy, power, hypertrophy, and just general muscular strength. And so again, the targets, as you see, 8 to 12 is generally set for a lot of these. If you're going for more strength endurance, you're really talking about 10 to 15, as I mentioned, sometimes up to 20. But if you're picking a challenging enough weight, 15 is a really, really good number. And the idea is you're not spending tons of time doing a lot of repetitions with weight. So I strongly encourage about 15. You get less bored that way too. But again, if we starting to get more to say powerlifting, we drop our rep range from 6 to lower. But for most other strength or hypertrophy, 8 to 10. Okay. Oh, yeah, and if you're curious about the percentages of your 1RM that you're lifting, is here. So, you're talking to like 50% maybe for your 15 rep ranges. Your 8 to 12, you're really talking about anywhere from 60, maybe up to 80%. 80% would be putting you closer to the lower rep range, and maybe for a couple of sets versus 3 sets. Whereas the lower you go, you can kind of push out a few more sets. Okay. And yeah, as you progress them, well, if you look week to week, or even, that's typically how you do your split. You want to gradually increase your intensity, volume, and shorter rest periods. Ultimately, though, depending on your goals, whether you really want to push for power or really want to push for just muscular endurance, you wouldn't necessarily change the rest periods for the power. You want to try to keep them long. For your muscular endurance, you want to shorten the rest periods, increase the volume, and the intensity can slowly increase for all of those. How do you increase intensity? Well, you increase the resistance or the amount of percentage of your 1RM. Okay. Yeah, and that's the most common way to progress. Plus, if you haven't ever weightlifted before, try it out. It's actually really rewarding. Not at first, maybe, but you can start really, really low, start slow. But a lot of people find that they get a lot of satisfaction. It actually surprises some people who think that they wouldn't enjoy going to the gym and lifting weights. You get a lot of satisfaction that over time, and again, as you know, over the first 8 weeks, there's a lot of neuromuscular adaptations that give you some good strength gains early on. It's kind of fun just seeing you slowly progress. You kind of get to see as you move up the weights that you can see that you're progressing, and that's really rewarding for a lot of people. So yeah, my two cents to get out there and try some of these things that we've been learning about this semester. Okay, well, that's it for this one, and we will catch you on the next lecture.